The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Kia ora and welcome to The Fold. I'm your host, Duncan, and this podcast is about the media in New Zealand. And this is like Christmas for me. This is this moment. What I'm about to talk about is my favourite piece of data that comes out of New Zealand's media. I'm talking about the Where Are the Audiences survey. It's done every 2 years, commissioned by New Zealand On Air and performed by Glasshouse. And it's not a particular. It's hard to get a read on how popular or influential it is, apart from one very specific audience, which I'll get to. But the reason I like it so much is that it's the only research that I'm aware of that attempts to do a phenomenally difficult but very important thing, which is try and measure the behaviour of a very diverse set of audiences across all media consumption. Right now, what you tend to see is people will measure within their medium. So news sites will talk about their traffic, TV channels about their ratings, radio about their ratings, and it's all sort of narrowly defined within the medium. And there is also just a huge vested interest in inflating your own numbers. And that is kind of hard to escape. So what this research does, and I think it was a very clever and visionary piece of work to commission it in 2014, is to say that we need a referee. We need something that resembles a neutral arbiter of what is really going on out there. Why does it matter? It matters because New Zealand On Air has a limited budget. It's depending on it's somewhere around $150 million, give or take. If I'm wrong on that, forgive me. But the point is less about the scale of it than what it has to do. It basically is meant to sort of foster a sense of national unity and to tell New Zealand stories to New Zealanders. And for the longest time, that wasn't the sort of how to do that, where to reach people, just wasn't a particularly complex exercise. You did it on radio and you did it on television. New Zealand On Air was previously funded by a broadcasting fee. Now it's funded out of general taxation. But the principle was that it was about it was about audio and visual mediums, and you could just, you took a look at Three's audience, you took a look at TVNZ's audience, in time you looked at Māori TV and Prime's audience and the various radio audiences, and you could sort of divide up the spending roughly according to their market shares. And obviously you fund RNZ for around $40 million a year to perform its functions in an ad-free environment. Then the internet happened and everything went crazy. And basically the sort of big mega trend that is the reason we need this survey and why it's so interesting is just the internet hit audiences, and then smartphones hit audiences, and then the marginal cost of data went down something close to zero, and more and more people got devices, and suddenly it became immensely complicated. And basically, and as a result, people can consume content from anywhere in the world. A lot of the time it was free. So without knowing what people are doing, you are in grave danger of basically continuing to fund the way you have always funded, and thereby not creating content for audiences whose behaviour has changed. And that is the story of this report. The big headline, the thing that's in it that is now sort of unequivocally clear. There were always these trends. We all kind of in some ways knew that this day was coming. It's just a matter of when would it come. So there's a line in it that if current trends continue, which, surprise, of course they're going to, then 2020 will be the crossover point where digital media overtakes traditional media in delivering the largest daily audiences in New Zealand. That is a seismic event. That basically says that television, radio, newspapers, magazines are now it's basically even right now, and from 2021 onwards, the trends will continue, and increasingly the TV and radio audiences will be smaller than the online audiences. This matters because TV and radio still take up the vast majority of our funding in New Zealand, and it also matters because the audiences for those, it's not like half of New Zealand watches or consumes traditional media and the other half doesn't, and that those two audiences look exactly the same. It's basically there is a 60-plus audience that massively disproportionately consumes traditional media. There are graphs in here which are quite crazy to look at that sort of prove that point. And then there is everyone else. It's particularly acute for those under 39. The reason that 39 is this interesting inflection point, and it's been there visible for quite some time, is that 39 sounds young to me as a 40-year-old, but it's the median age in New Zealand. So when you're talking about people under 39, I think it's often characterized in media, and because people and politicians are mostly over 39 and all the rest of it, you sort of think that there are more people there, but in fact it's half the population that is under 39. And so there is a huge challenge implicit in this for funding for New Zealand On Air, but also for politicians who are sort of tasked with meeting these, who need to make a decision. Like fundamentally, this thing is coming to a head now, and I think we have, we've up until now, while traditional media was still, even if marginally, and even if it wasn't demographically perfect, the dominant model, I think you could make a case for at least, allowing for the sclerosis of things just not changing. I think now the sort of the argument for basically doing one of two things. One is a huge increase in New Zealand On Air funding, such that digital audiences are given the same quantity of funding and that as the traditional media audiences, or you're going to have to take a big chunk out of those, and that's a really difficult thing, because if you were to do that, for example, let's take RNZ, which still gets the vast bulk of its funding goes towards the creation of its radio product. Now, I should say that I'm an RNZ super consumer. I use the app to listen back to audio. I listen to Morning Report every morning. There's probably like 10 different RNZ products that I consume on a very regular basis. But I'm atypical as a 40-year-old. Like the bulk of RNZ's audience, and they know this, is over 60. So, how do they continue to devote the bulk of their funding to serving an audience which is disproportionately old, which is disproportionately Pakeha. Like, it's when you are for all New Zealand and you're funded to be that the only ad-free sort of platform for New Zealand, you kind of have to make a real honest attempt to meet a broader audience than that. I mean, that was what was driving the youth radio station that was meant to take over from Concert FM. That was exactly the kind of really difficult but fundamentally necessary decision that had to be taken if you've got limited funding and there is no appetite to grow that, and you just feel the sort of moral weight of the missing audience. Whether a radio station was the right way to go and meet that audience, I mean, there's data in here which I'll get to, which suggests that it absolutely isn't. But the fundamental thing that they were trying to do, you kind of have to respect. It ended up blowing up, and this is going to be the really confronting and difficult thing, right, is that when they tried to do that, the Concert FM Don't Touch That Dial Brigade got up in arms, and within a couple of weeks, it was reinstated. And where's that youth radio station? How's that going? No sign of it. Maybe it's going to be online. Maybe it's going to be another frequency. There's it seems like it's sort of in suspended animation alongside the TVNZ RNZ merger. And so anyway, I want to basically try and get into the things that sort of scream out as the most interesting data points to me. So what we're seeing is, and they describe it in the report, is that we're in the era of peak fragmentation. We're seeing the transition is at its apex. In 5 years' time, the bulk of the transition will have happened. And it may well be that we are down some linear TV channels, that radio, is just a less popular medium, that there's a bunch of, that digital is just a bigger, stronger, more robust sort of area than across all the different mediums and platforms than it is at the moment. And that will, to some extent, depend on the government interaction with it and how sort of long-term and stable that funding is. If the funding for digital ends up as stable as the funding for radio and television has been, then I think you will see that sector grow and improve its ability to meet audiences. If it feels like it's as fluctuating as things like the RNZ Innovation Fund, for example, which was blown up, a big thing, then disappeared a year later, then, which, there's a very real possibility that happens, then we are in a situation which I think it'll be hard to continue to, like the era, basically, to draw a line under it, I think the era of experimentation is over. The era where certain things are in question is somewhat over. To pick an example, in terms of the local video on demand platforms, now many of you will already know this, so forgive me, but if you don't, there's a distinction between video on demand, which is free to access, and subscription video on demand, which is paid. Video on demand, there is really only one, and it's TVNZ. TVNZ on demand has 21% daily usage, which is freaking enormous. It's 50% larger as far as audience goes than TVNZ2, which is nominally their youth brand, and something is going to give there, because, I mean, it's sort of hard to apples with apples, because TVNZ on demand has all of TVNZ1, all of TVNZ2, all of Duke, and a whole bunch of other stuff besides. But the sort of cost of and the amount of energy devoted to making, and particularly the amount of New Zealand On Air funding, where the primary platform is TVNZ2 versus TVNZ On Demand, there is just quite a significant difference there. I mean, TVNZ2 is basically the short and street channel. Without it, you really struggle to sort of hold the thing together. It's dropped to a 14% daily usage rate. That compares to 3 with 23% and TVNZ1 with 44%, which is just a shockingly robust figure. Now, I'm just going to do a quick aside here, a bit of a caveat that sort of sits across all this research, and at various times I'm going to drill into it because I think it's very significant. Now, this research is conducted every 2 years, so first conducted in 2014, done in 2016, 2018, 2020. It's normally conducted in March and April. This year, you might remember there was quite a large news event that just radically altered people's behaviour across a whole bunch of vectors, but particularly media consumption. So they made the decision, I think it was the right one, to delay the research, and it ended up happening between May and June. Why is that significant? Well, in May we were still under level 2, and a lot of us working from home still, and in June, while we went to level 1, there was still altered behaviour. There was still the 1 p.m. press conferences. You think about how your own media consumption changed during that period. I only have to look back at the spin-offs data for April and May. Our numbers were just through the roof, and so that one-time news event, it really pushed audiences towards the likes of TVNZ1 in particular. I mean, I think that they basically won the coverage war. I mean, the huge investment that they've made into 6 p.m. Like last night I was watching the news, or maybe it was the night before, Simon Dallow was standing inside a house that was being built around him. Like that, they have like quite sophisticated augmented reality, and they know how to use it. They basically just have thrown resource strategically into news, basically, betting that, knowing that it was where it was already a huge audience, knowing that it was where the battle for the whole night is staged, and that it was essentially if you cash up your news offering, you're basically daring your opposition, which is 3, to either match you, which they can't afford to do, or just to sort of slowly bleed audience across to you. They'd already done that, and fair play to them. And I'm sure there were also noble reasons, but let's be honest, these are businesses. Businesses are competitive, but they had that just rock solid infrastructure, and then the biggest news event of our lives comes along, and everyone's anxious, everyone's trapped at home. You're going to watch the news, and overwhelmingly people watch TVNZ. And the percentage of people, I'll talk to Trust in a bit actually, but there's some amazing things for them from a brand perspective, even as they just announced another sizable loss. But I think strategic. Well, in the long run, TVNZ is the best placed of our major media companies right now, and I'll sort of explain why I think that. But the reason why just returning to the point about the timing of the research, commuting was way down because we were working from home. So the commuter mediums really suffered. What are commuter mediums? Radio is a huge commuter medium. Radio took a real hammering in this report. It's basically, aside from the 2 news stations, or the 2 big news stations, I should say, RNZ and News Talk ZB, there was no other station with a daily reach of over 4%. Now, everyone in radio will be absolutely fuming at that, and they probably have a point, to my mind, that if people aren't driving their cars to work, they're not listening to the radio. That's not particularly hard to discuss. The other medium that really didn't show any growth, or not no growth, but showed less growth than you might have anticipated, was podcasting. I obviously, this is a podcast. I'm a huge fan of the medium, so with that bias declared, I also think that podcasts thrive on public transport. Because you don't have a car radio, you've got your phone, and it's a lean in kind of self-selecting kind of medium. If you're not commuting on public transport, which not only were people not commuting, but they were scared of public transport, rightly so. So the volumes were down, therefore you would just expect, and we did see podcasts to be down. That isn't acknowledged in the research, but I think it's hard to argue. The other people who suffered hugely in this was Sky. Now, Sky's had a really rough few years. New CEO, Martin Stewart's been in the job 18 months and has, had to pay a massive sum to retain the rugby rights. They've lost the cricket rights. It's been a hard time. Sky, but nothing harder than COVID taking, and they built their whole strategy around sports, around live sports. What was happening in May and June? Heaps of stuff, but not sports. There was just nothing on the freaking air. So the numbers for Sky are just, I think they're so distorted as to not even be particularly credible. Now, Sky is down. There's no doubt in anyone's mind, and certainly their own. They now don't break out the difference between their sort of online subscriptions and their pay TV subscriptions, but the number of people who subscribe to their core and very expensive and still in many respects amazing pay TV product is definitely down. But to what extent it's down, to what extent usage is down, that's that's I think not something that we can know because some people will have, there was also an economic crisis. They thought people would have cut what expenses they could. Sky is like a classic, nice to have. So they might have had a dip in subs. The other thing is they had bought Lightbox but not yet merged it with Neon. So there was a big platform integration going on, and they weren't really strongly pushing the new relaunched Neon, which, by the way, I think is the best streaming service in New Zealand and one of the best in the world in terms of the quality of the catalogue. If I could only have one SVOD, it wouldn't be Netflix, it would be Neon. But that was, that product, while in market, wasn't a priority. So I think this happened at the single worst time in Sky's history to do a survey. So while Sky is in trouble, I just don't think we can use this. I think you almost have to ring fence it within this survey to sort of really know what was going on. And I also think that part of that is that also impacts the TVNZ1 numbers, because you had such everyone had been trained to watch the 6 o'clock news again. Let's see where we are in a year. It might be that audience sticks around. It might be that it sort of further fragments, but I just don't think we know. I have heard a rumour that they're going to move this to an annual survey, which I think would be an excellent use of resource, because things are changing so much, and quite frankly, this survey has every chance of being a rogue in many respects. So you just, when you're spending tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to go and meet audiences, you really need to know where they are, and so robust data really matters. The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to oMedia for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
So let's talk a little bit more about TVNZ. The biggest channel in New Zealand now, as they're defining, is YouTube, with a 48% penetration. That's overtaken TVNZ1 on 44%. YouTube, it's an interesting one, right? Because it's very, you can, all of our content's there's a lot of New Zealand content there, but fundamentally when you go to YouTube, the algorithm decides what you're going to watch or search terms that you input, that means that your ability to kind of consume or be served New Zealand content is limited. There's obviously the signature innovation of it was the fact that it was dominated by user-generated content that basically anyone could upload, and there's all kinds of issues with that. But, so YouTube is the sort of the big headline winner from this. I actually don't think it's as interesting as some of the other numbers that come out of it. I think... So TVNZ won 44% penetration, nearly double 3 on 23%. That battle, to the extent it ever was a battle, is largely over. And 3 was, part of 3's problem is that 3 was always the 25 to 54 audience company. Well, that audience is the one that's gone online, and when it's gone online, it hasn't just naturally migrated to 3 now, which is basically is flat at 4%, a kind of a negligible audience figure. It's gone, I think, mostly to Netflix. Netflix is now, we all sort of know this, but Netflix's penetration is just unbelievable, to the point where I think New Zealand On Air is going to have to, just as it had to sort of figure out what to do with Sky when Sky was in the ascendant, it's going to have to figure out what to do with Netflix, because Netflix has got 61% of people's lives. They're disproportionately young. I'm going to talk about the diverse audiences part later, because I really think that is the signature channel challenge. But that beautiful app, which is perfect everywhere you touch it, and the algorithm approach is just increasingly sophisticated, and it's pretty good now. As much as I'm a big human hand curation person in general, that is like a massive channel for people now. Its daily consumption is 36%. I think it's entirely possible in a year's time, absent another major news event, it overtakes TVNZ1 to become the dominant channel. The thing about Netflix is we think of it as a singular entity, but basically it's an infinite number of personalized channels. Like, I'm in here with Tina Tiller producing. When she turns on Netflix, I bet that she sees something like entirely different. There might be only a tiny handful of common shows versus the one that I turn on, and same with you listening to this, and that that's the genius of it, right? Like it learns and adapts to our consumption habits and behavior incredibly well. TVNZ On Demand isn't trying to do that, which I think is the right strategic move. They're going down a sort of a channels approach, because you can't compete with the best engineers in the world work at Netflix, and you can kind of tell. What else? So TVNZ, huge audience, huge trust. So 28% of people named it as the source, the news source that they trusted most during COVID-19. That was a new question that was inserted. I'm really glad they did it. I think it's really interesting. No other entity, the New Zealand government's COVID-19 website got 8%. To be honest, I don't even know why that was an option, because it's not really a media platform or in any traditional sense. But that's by the by. No other media company was over 4%. There were other people like Staff Herald, high usage, but the trust just was way down. And I think that that's really interesting. That will prompt a lot of soul searching. Staff has made a big deal about their pivot to trust, and I'm a huge admirer of Staff. Over the past year, that's not news to anyone who's a regular listener to this podcast, but the fact that hasn't yet filtered through into a sort of brand recognition within the survey will just shows you how hard it is to regain it after you've kind of lost it during their sort of the worst of their clickbait era. RNZ being relatively low there as well. Again, I think that could be due to the fact that radio as a medium was less useful as because we weren't moving around, but it will be sort of an interesting thing. Just going to quickly talk now about some of the big medium stuff. the number of households which said they had a working television, which is a question that's always fascinated me, because now for a lot of nerdy reasons I won't get into, but the number is 78%, and that's higher. The older you are, the more likely you are to have that, which obviously means that the younger you are, the less likely you are to have it. The number of people with a working radio is 61%. Given that we spend so much of our money funding for those mediums as the primary platform, the fact that 20% of people don't even have a working television, 40% of people don't even have a working radio, that's a challenge, man. Like you got to figure out what to do with that. So let's talk a bit, man. Honestly, I could talk about this for way too long, and there are probably very few people who would be up for that. But I think this stuff just fascinates me. One more thing on sort of platforms. There's a new question that's been added to this, which is about online gaming, and the penetration for online gaming is, the numbers are excellent, which sort of scans with its sort of cultural significance. The reason why that's really interesting is New Zealand On Air basically doesn't fund gaming, and New Zealand just generally doesn't. It's this sort of orphan medium, but it's really highly paid, and it's really highly engaged with. It's also disproportionately engaged with by Māori, Pacifica, young people. It has a much more even gender split than the cliche goes, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to fund because the big games have hundreds of very highly paid engineers working on them. There is no one is. My sense, and I'm not the most avid gamer in the world, though I do have a Switch and I do love it. But my sense is that when you play a game, you play it for the nature of the game. There is very little kind of cultural. There's very little nationalistic cultural attachment towards a game. Like you're not going to play a New Zealand game because it's a New Zealand game, even if it's got inferior sort of gameplay and story, graphics, etc. So, and there are some phenomenally successful New Zealand gaming companies, but I think it'll be a really challenging medium for New Zealand On Air to fund. But I think that having asked the question and opened that door, the case from the industry for some kind of funding will be very hard to ignore. And honestly, as hard as it's going to be, I think that they have to figure out a way to engage in it because it's just, for so many people, it is a really, really important media consumption form for them, probably the primary one. Like more people would define themselves as gamers in terms of their kind of cultural, what they do with their time, I would think, than would define themselves as like music fans. I mean, and music, by the way, takes a real hammering in this survey as well. And again, I think that is also in part because it's a commuting. A lot of people's time listening to music is when they're getting around. The big winner out of it though is Spotify and streaming music. That has, again, that's not particularly news to anyone, but it's a huge winner out of it. The big five media companies in New Zealand, Sky, TVNZ, MediaWorks, NZME stuff. Those are the big five public ones, and let's just throw RNZ in there as well, even though they're non-commercial. This is really challenging for all of them because for all of them, their biggest and most valuable property would be defined as traditional media. Now that the tipping point has been reached, and in terms of the digital transition, how would I rate them? I think that TVNZ is probably in the best position in the whole survey. NZME obviously has a big audience for the Herald, and its premium subs are up to 43,000, which is, I think, an excellent number. It's still struggling with. It's still going through a transition, and I think it will make it through that transition. It's just how big will it be on the other side of it. But the challenge to radio remains the same. The thing that's interesting to me about who the audience of the survey is, it's absolutely for New Zealand On Air, and it's also interesting to nerds like me. Does the media buying industry, like the people who place advertisement, do they pay attention to it? I think they should. Whether they do, that's an open question. But if they start to in a big way, then that will be quite troubling for all the big media companies. Stuff obviously has, one of the biggest websites in the country on a per capita basis, one of the biggest websites in the world. It has instituted its members program that by all accounts is going well. The pivot to trust, the redesign, the sort of emphasizing of its best work, just I give it 10s all round for that kind of thing. Still, it's got a lot of work to do to handle this transition. Sky has massively downsized. Sky's workforce, I'm not going to say these numbers because I haven't stood them up yet, but if what I've been told is true, there is no company that has shrunk to pivot anything like Sky. Its digital products are still like a total mess. There's too many of them, and a lot of them are in some kind of state of disrepair. It also has the best catalogue in New Zealand and some long-term deals so that buy it time to figure that out. Whether it will, that's an open question. And three is probably the furthest behind MediaWorks. 3Now is not great. Rover is second to iHeartRadio. News Hub does really, really well, kind of outperforms the investment in it, I think. But just fundamentally, it doesn't have a single killer product that it can pin itself to. RNZ just does well online, and particularly it's gone heavily into podcasts and dominates that area like kind of no other. No one else dominates any other medium like RNZ does podcasts for New Zealand, but it still underinvests in digital, and basically either it makes a hard decision, which I think is almost impossible, like if it started to de-resource its core radio product, people, that would make the concert reaction look completely, it would dwarf it. So it basically will demand more money, and it will almost certainly get it, is my assumption, assuming that Labour is re-elected and is more powerful, which obviously looks very likely. So all of those companies, some of which are far more reliant on New Zealand On Air funding their content than others, I should say, and the likes of Stuff and NZME, they're probably a net neutral out of this survey, apart from they will be annoyed and probably disagree with the trust findings. But they, I think, will and should demand more funding from New Zealand On Air, and whether that comes through some sort of new fund that exists to fund journalism, which has been much discussed, or whether that is just more video funding that allows them to have more volume. Because a lot of the issue we have right now with video funding for platforms is it's so splintered that no one really has the volume to kind of acquire and maintain an audience. There is a case to be made, and I think that this will become a louder conversation, that TVNZ has already won the sort of battle to be the platform for video for New Zealand, and will start to, should 3 give up on 3Now and be on TVNZ on demand and some sort of revenue share, I think is a case. Should the government effectively, whether it compels TVNZ to, or whether TVNZ does it from a sort of a strategic kind of capture sense, does it try and own the video space? That's sort of up in the air. So I'm coming to the end of my time. The thing that I really, and the thing that I think is most important to emphasize is just how there has to be action out the back of this. Like if you look at the audience behavior for young people, they watched TV yesterday. Basically they're far less likely to watch television. Actually, let's expand that a bit. Like Māori, Pasifika, Asian people and young people all are much more actually Māori have a slightly different profile, that they are they do consume more television, but that one sort of vague, slightly anomalous thing aside, they tend to be disproportionately lower consumers of mediums like radio, television, and much more high consumers of online video and streaming music, online gaming, all the stuff which is either unfunded or underfunded on a proportional basis. So there's just this, you can't continue to do that, especially not a Labour government. And you know, to be quite frank, New Zealand On Air as an organisation, just, you know, as much as like it's heavily lobbied by television, it has long relationships, and it has a vested interest in keeping the production sector alive, which is really it funds mostly production companies. It doesn't fund platforms directly for the most part. But you can't look at this survey and continue to behave as you have before. And it's been sort of inching along. Obviously, we get a small amount of funding to make a few shows. So does newsroom stuff, you know, and a few others. Coconut, for example. It is just sort of, none of it particularly has scale, and I think and the problem is you can't fund directly, or certainly there hasn't been a history of funding directly for YouTube, and there are no guarantees there, and the numbers are smaller. So you're and it's very sort of chicken or the egg. It'd be hard to fund like a $7 million drama for YouTube as the primary platform, or for any one of these things. Are $7 million dramas still a thing that you can fund? I don't know. I mean, we've got a whole system of actors and production companies set up around them continuing to exist in some form. But basically, when you're funding for television, you are funding for older white people who have had it pretty good across every metric you can find. And by the way, I know that this isn't the entirety of the audience, it's just a disproportionate share of the audience. And so these are the decisions that are confronting New Zealand On Air and thus government, is like, are you going to let them make huge changes? It will be really destabilising. You'd have a lot of people losing jobs, a lot of jobs created elsewhere, but in the hope, and it's no guarantee, but in the hope that there will be a sort of a new, you will go and find those. They literally call them the hard to find audiences, which, you know, even that is sort of sticks in my craw of it. It's like, you know, they're hard to find because you're not really trying hard enough to find them, would be what I'd say. And so that is the big thing that confronts all of us. And I'm not suggesting that the spin-off or any of the online platforms should, by as of right, be considered the best way to go and do that. But the shift has happened, and it's really, really apparent in the start. I urge anyone listening to this who's curious to go and find it on the New Zealand On Air website, and because there's so much in it, and I'm out of time, and I really thank you for sort of enduring this. And yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting few years as New Zealand On Air and the whole media industry processes the fact that the shift, which was always coming, is now come, and we get through it. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-off Podcast Network.